Shalom, shalom from Israel, where we are about to celebrate Yom Ha'Atzmaut. Yom Ha'Atzmaut is Israel's Independence Day, celebrated both in Israel and in Jewish communities across the world. And the question is, if Yom Ha'Atzmaut, Independence Day, is a civil, secular celebration, does it have spiritual and religious meaning, just like others Moadim like Hanukkah and Purim. So this is connected to the question if the state of Israel has religious significance, which means is our being here in Israel as a Jewish state only important on a secular level, or are we actually fulfilling an important part of the Torah? Is it a mitzvah? Now, I want to explain this question because the fact that a Jew should live in Eretz Israel, or may I be more precise and say that when a Jew is living in Eretz Israel, he's fulfilling a mitzvah, this is a fact. This is well known. This has been for all of our history, even in the Galut. There's no question that there is a mitzvah to dwell in Eretz Israel. We know this from many halachot, but especially from the halachot in the Shulchan Aruch, about marriage and Ktubot, Hilchot Ktubot, where it says that whenever, it doesn't matter if it's the husband or the wife, when one of them wants to go to Eretz Yisrael, then he's right. Whoever wants to go to Eretz Yisrael is right, because there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. And even if this means that Chas v'Shalom, the family will break apart, which means let's say the husband would want to go to Eretz Yisrael and his wife won't come with him, and you'll have to have a divorce. Again, chas v'shalom. So even if it's that bad, still the person who is responsible for this is the one who doesn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael. Meaning that if it's the husband who wants to go and his wife doesn't want to go, then according to the halacha, he doesn't have to pay her the ktubah, because it's her fault. She should want to go to Eretz Yisrael. And if it's the opposite, if it's the wife who wants to go to Eretz Yisrael and the husband who is reluctant, then he has to give her a get, a divorce, and he has to pay her the whole sum of the ktubah, meaning that the halacha sees him as the problematic one and the one responsible. So, of course, we don't want to get to these situations, but it teaches us that there is a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael, and that's simple and clear. There is a machloket if it's an obligatory mitzvah or not. Rav Moshe Feinstein famously says in Igrot Moshe that anyone who goes to Eretz Yisrael is fulfilling a mitzvah, but you don't have to do this mitzvah. Just like there are other mitzvot that when you do it, it's a mitzvah, but you don't have to do them. And others have given good evidence that it's actually an obligation. But this whole discussion is only on the personal, individual level, meaning a Jew living in Eretz Yisrael. But that's not our question, because in Yom Ha'Atzmaut we're not celebrating the fact that Jews as individuals live in Eretz Yisrael. We're celebrating the fact that there's a Jewish state. And this is more complicated. Actually, it's not complicated, but people make it complicated. The question is, where is statehood mentioned in the Torah? Which means, if I would be a Jew living here in Eretz Yisrael, under Ottoman sovereignty, or British, or Arab, or even American, whoever, what would be missing according to the Torah? That's the question. Where is statehood mentioned in the Torah? For this, I want to give three answers. Answer number one, I call it the come on approach. The come on approach goes like this. Come on, anybody who read the Torah knows that the Torah is a book, a way of life that's aimed mainly at the national level. Okay? Who doesn't know that the Torah, the story of Am Yisrael, of Klal Yisrael, is to be a Mamlechet Kohanim, V'goy Kadosh, to be a Jewish state in Eretz Yisrael, and be Mikache Hashem for the whole world as a state, as a sovereign state. Everybody knows this. This is obvious. This is the basic reading of the Torah. It's interesting that soon we're going to be at Parashat Bechukotai, where we have the reward and punishment. The main reward in the Torah is on a national level. The Torah says, "V'natati shalom ba'aretz, u'ldaftem et oivechem v'naflu lifnechem lecharev." which means you'll be successful in Eretz Yisrael and you'll win your wars. The individual doesn't fight a war. The nation fights a war. So the main sachar in the Torah is not, the Torah doesn't even speak about like Olam Haba, your personal afterlife and paradise. The main sachar in the Torah is on the national level. And the same goes for the Onesh. The Torah warns us, "V'natati et arechem chorba, v'shimoti et migdashechem, v'shimoti et haaretz, v'shamemu alea oivechem hayoshvim ba, v'etchem ezareh bagoyim, v'arikot yecharchem cherev," which means we're going to lose our wars, we're going to lose our state, and we're going to be scattered among the nations. Again, this is on the national level. So we don't really need to get, according to the come on approach, we're saying, come on, read the Torah, read the book. It says it very clearly. That's the whole idea of the Torah, of the Bechira in the Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's to be a Mamlechet Kohanim, a Goy Kadosh. So we don't need to get into specific sources and bring halachic proofs. It's the basis of the Torah. It's just like asking, where does it say that one should breathe? It's just like asking, where does it say that first you put the water in the pool and only then do you dive in? It doesn't have to say that specifically because these things are obvious. So that's the first answer to this question. The second answer, I'm reminding you that our question is, where is statehood mentioned in the Torah? The second answer is what I call the means to the end approach. Meaning, look, let's say there's not a mitzvah to have a state, but there is a mitzvah for Jews to be in Eretz Yisrael. Well, there's no way for Jews to live a Jewish life safely in Eretz Yisrael without us having a state. That's what history's lesson is. It's very clear. Whenever we are not sovereign in the land, we couldn't lead normal lives in Eretz Yisrael. And Jews tried. They tried many times. And therefore, a Jewish state is needed, even if only to enable the individual Jews to live in Eretz Yisrael. Now, we don't have time for all of my adventures and stories, but I do wish to share with you that just last week, I came back from a neighboring state, which much of its territory is halachically Eretz Yisrael, meaning I was at an Arab state, which some of its territory is Eretz Yisrael, but it's not Medinat Yisrael. And I could see this with my very own eyes, because in this state, you're not allowed to be openly Jewish. You're not allowed to bring in your tefillin. I did, but you're not supposed to. If they would see me with a tefillin, they would confiscate it at the border. You're not allowed to bring in a siddur. I had to use pictures on my phone. You're not allowed to wear a kippah. You're not allowed to wear a tzitzis. Okay? So I did bring these things with me. I think they know that Jews bring them with them, but they have to be concealed. So I was davening in my room privately, and I'm not speaking even about a minyan or a shchita or a shul or a Beit Chabad. So, and I was really feeling for a bit, in a nutshell, the feeling of being a Marano, those Jews who were in Spain and Portugal, and they had to conceal their Jewishness, and they were trying to practice it in secrecy. So I really had a taste of what it means to be on the soil of Eretz Yisrael, but not in Medinat Yisrael. So even if our goal is for Jews to individually live in Eretz Yisrael, there's no way to do that practically and live a Jewish life if we don't have a state. That's answer number 2. Answer number 3 is the Ramban. There we have the Rambam, Maimonides, and the Ramban. He was number 2 in the list of important Rishonim. Rambam was number 1. So it's pretty famous that though it's clear that the Rambam mentions Eretz Yisrael in his halachot, and it seems that it's a mitzvah according to him, but still in the list, in Sefer HaMitzvot, the Rambam has a list of the 613 mitzvot, and he didn't list Eretz Yisrael, Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, in the list. And that's a famous question. How could the Rambam not list such an important and central mitzvah, especially when in other halachot in the Mishneh Torah we see that he does believe in this mitzvah, and that's a question that many Rishonim wrote about, and Achronim as well. But the most famous is the Ramban. Okay, the Ramban has a list of objections to the Rambam's list, and his most famous objection regards our mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. But the Ramban says very clear words. He has a clear definition. We should listen to what the Ramban says. He says, "Shenitztavenu lareshet haaretz asher natan ha'el yitbarach v'yit'ala lavotenu lavraham liyitzchak uliyaakov velo na'azva biyad zulatenu min ha'umot o lishmama." We have a mitzvah to inherit this land of Eretz Yisrael. Who is this we? Who is this we, the people? Who has this mitzvah? So it's not on the individual level. It's Klal Yisrael. It's Am Yisrael as a nation. And that's why he says, Lo na'azva biyad zulatenu min ha'umot o lishmama. We will not leave Eretz Yisrael to other nations. So if Eretz Yisrael shouldn't be in the hand of other nations, rather it should be in our hand. What does that mean? Who is this us? Who is this our? Who is this collective entity? This is Klal Yisrael. Okay? It shouldn't be in the hands of another nation. It should be in the hands of our nation. So, territory, a land that is in the hands of a nation. What is that called in our modern language? That's called a state. That's called a medina. So out of all of the many Mekorot dealing with the love of Eretz Yisrael and our obligation to Eretz Yisrael, the Ramban is the most clearest when he defines this mitzvah as a mitzvah on the national level. So that's the modern definition of a land in the hands of a nation. It's a state. So if so, we have one question left. Why didn't we fulfill this mitzvah for so many generations? And the answer is very easy. It's easy and it's also tragic. We couldn't fulfill this mitzvah. We were too weak. The Gemara says in many places, Ones rachamana patre. When you're anus, when you want to fulfill a mitzvah, but you just simply can't, it's impossible, then you have a ptor. You have a Kadosh Baruch Hu understands. Mipnei chateinu galinu ma'aretzeinu. Apparently, Rav Kook deals with this on the philosophical level, why we needed to take a break from statehood for many generations. What was the spiritual meaning of the galut? The Sefer HaKuzari also deals with it. Other Rishonim. So we couldn't have a state for many generations. Baruch Hashem, now we can. And not only it's not only possible, it's necessary for Jewish survival today in the whole world. So therefore, we should all celebrate Yom Ha'Atzmaut for two reasons. One reason, I'm speaking about the religious level, the halachic level. One reason is that Hashem saved hundreds of thousands of Jews who were in Eretz Yisrael at that time. There's a famous Gemara in Masechet Megillah saying that it's a kal v'chomer. Ma me'avdut lecherut amrinan shira mimita lechaim lo kol sheken. Meaning, if we say Hallel, if we say Shira for leaving Egypt, where we were able to live, we were we were slaves, but we were alive, and still we say Hallel when we when we quit Egypt. So the Gemara says, Kal v'chomer mimita lechaim. If we were about to perish and we survived, of course we should say Hallel. This is in Masechet Megillah, so the Gemara asks, if so, why don't we say Hallel on Purim? Because we were saved on Purim. And the Gemara says, Lefi she'en omrim Hallel anes shebechutz la'aretz. You say Hallel on a miracle in Eretz Yisrael, not in Chutz La'aretz. So the saving of hundreds of thousands of Jews in 1948, and all their tzetzaim and tzetzainu, all the millions of Jews who are their descendants, that was a miracle in Eretz Yisrael, and therefore we have to say Shira and Yom Ha'atzmaut. That's one reason. But the second, I think more enduring for generation reason, is that we are celebrating the zchut to fulfill this fundamental mitzvah, once again, the mitzvah of Jewish statehood in Eretz Yisrael. So therefore, I wish you, not only on the secular and civil level, which is also important, but on the spiritual, halachic, and kedusha level, Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach.